of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Trish.
Mrs. Brew?
Here.
Mr. Kramer?
Here.
Mr. Meneghini?
Here.
Mr. Oja?
Here.
Mr. Pop?
We'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion on the agenda?
Do we need a motion to excuse Mr. Pop?
Oh, yes, we do.
I'll make a motion.
I'll support.
Sorry about that.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Meneghini?
Yes.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes. Now we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
Mr. Meneghini?
Yes.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of November 5th, 2018.
I'll make a motion, we approve.
Support.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Meneghini?
Yes.
We'll move on to the approval of the manifest 2018-22. Brett, do you have any questions on the manifest?
I do not.
Mr. Mangini?
I have nothing.
Nothing? And I have nothing, okay. Do I have a motion on the manifest?
I'll make a motion, we approve manifest 2018-22 in the amount of $732,624.46.
Support.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Meneghini?
Yes.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Anyone wishing to address the council on any agenda item shall do so now. State your name and address for the record. We have none. We'll move on to appointments and presentations. Ordinance number 430, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of ordinance readings here that put together. Actually, there's a few more that we're going to be seeing over the course of the next few months. But I figure with the requests that have been coming in, we should get started. In our charter, through our the council report, the charter does not adequately reflect what is more of a more common procedure, which talks about first reading, second reading, and then public hearing. So we've just been using that. I think it's a good process. It gets the reading out a couple times, and then we can get, people can see it on TV. They can kind of know that it's coming, and then we can have the public hearing on the ordinance in a month or so. So probably at the next meeting we'll have another reading, and then we'll discuss when the council may want to move forward with the public hearing on the issue. On the first ordinance, this one deals with tourist-oriented directional signs, or TODs. And again, it's quite a lengthy packet. I gave you a lot of information off of the state MCL, and also from MDOT, their tourist-oriented directional sign requirements, rules, and regulations. And typically, the state of Michigan has a pretty restrictive off-premise sign billboard rule, and really, getting a permit for a billboard is pretty challenging. In fact, I think it's almost like the liquor licenses, where you need to have one be moved or someone sell their billboard license. What this particular sign request is that it has in the legislation the ability for municipality to allow what they call these tourist-oriented directional sign, off-premise signs, which basically is like when you're traveling down the highway and you see food, next exit, lodging, next exit. And so like in our case, we had a request from the hotel that said, we'd like to have a sign at the intersection of US 8 and US 2, which gives direction to the hotel, or you could have the ski hill, or you could have the golf course, something where when people are driving by, they would know that there's a direction, it's an off-premise and it's a direction to go. There's a couple other locations, and I'm going to bring this up at our DDA meeting on Wednesday, that there's a couple other locations that I think are important for Norway. One is, it'll be in Wisconsin, but it'll be out at the US 8 141 interchange. And then in Michigan, up by the US 141, US 2 intersection. And I think I'd like to pursue maybe getting some additional signage there to allow people to know, they could take a right or, come off and come into Norway for a couple of our businesses. So it's really an economic development, a business tool, to allow people to know that the businesses are there. Now, in order for them to have the sign, they contacted MDOT, and MDOT said, well, you can't have it unless the city passes this ordinance. So I reviewed a couple of sample ordinances. They can be very simple. You'll notice the ordinance that I provided to you is a one-page ordinance, basically saying we allow it. This isn't something I've had a chance to really review with Grant. It's pretty straightforward, and I know that we did. I think we went back a couple times. In fact, did you provide this one or no? Maybe. I think I pulled this one off of like Ontonagon or somewhere. Just like I said, it's very simple, and there's actually another. I talked with the Crystal Falls office, and it doesn't have to get very wordy. It's just basic ordinance. So our first reading is for this ordinance to allow a direction sign. I think there was probably a couple other opportunities for some of our businesses, to have these directional signs. So it's also something that we would then implement within the zoning code to make sure everything is straight. So the first start is to have the city council to say we allow it, and then we'll address it, some additional details in zoning. Does anybody have any questions?
I don't have a problem with that. Anybody else? No. And you don't need a vote on that tonight?
I don't. It's a reading. We can talk about, our charter basically says that the council can pass an ordinance, and then the requirement in the charter is basically how you publish it. You have X amount of days following it, and then there's an enactment period. So it doesn't even account for any readings or public hearings or anything. I think it's a good policy to have public hearing. We have passed ordinances where it's so straightforward, so simple that we say, okay, we could do a public hearing. But if you want to go through a second reading at our next meeting and then do public hearing in, say, I could schedule a public hearing for the last meeting in December, so by the end of the year, we'd have it published. That's,
A couple of questions to
Okay.
straight. Does MDOT provide these signs, or is this the business is going to have to provide them? Or
MDOT will not provide the signs, so that'll be something we'll have to work with the businesses on, if it's a business specific, or it might be something that we, when I talk to the DDA, maybe the DDA will, look at it as economic development and provide
And these
signs.
would all be in the public right away?
They're in the public right away. If we have to go onto private property, we would definitely have to have an easement for the private property.
How do you guys want to handle it? Do you want a second reading, then a public hearing, or?
I'm fine just going to a public hearing, doing the one reading and then going to a public hearing on it.
I'm fine with that, too.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we can, I don't know when we can get it in the paper. We'll look at the dates. We may still be looking at the end of December.
That's fine.
Second meeting, depending on how much time. So.
Okay, that's fine. Want to move on to number 8, ordinance number 431.
Now, this one is in response to the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, legalized marijuana. And it's something that we've been following. Obviously, we had a good indication that particular proposal was going to pass. It's something that probably on the manager's listserv, the attorney's listserv, you name it, they're probably all trying to find out what everybody's thinking of doing with with the law and the potential options that are available. And just like when we went through the medical marijuana, a little different on this particular case where you have to opt out, actually opt out, if you are looking at not allowing the facilities part of the law. That does give the municipalities that option. I'm going to tell you that 90+%, and I'm throwing that number off just based on what I'm seeing on the listserv, our municipalities are opting out at this point and moving in that direction quickly, and it's because, just like we talked about with the medical marijuana, the state is not prepared to handle the legislation at this point, or the regulation at this point. Most communities are saying, hey, regardless of what we feel personally, it's now going to be the law and legalizing it. We're going to look at the regulations that the state is going to put in place, but at this point, there's no guidance. So communities are quickly moving towards opting out of allowing facilities at this time until the state can get its act together and put the regulations in place that will allow us to know how we're going to regulate. And you know, I'm going to be talking with the Planning Commission in about another week and a half on the same issue, and quite frankly, we're not even sure where in the zoning, if we have much options in zoning and how that works. So we had a little more direction when it came to the Medical Marijuana Act, but in this one, we have no direction whatsoever. Grant, do you have anything that you want to add to that? You've been following us more than I have, actually.
Just not a lot, Ray. I think I would echo your comments. You know, it's passed within the state of Michigan. The voters have spoken, and they're going to legalize marijuana within the state of Michigan. I think the biggest change between this and the medical marijuana law that is still in place as well. So there's now, I think, three different marijuana-related laws on the books. Some of them coexist, some of them do not. That they'll get straightened away either in the courts or the legislature at some point. But the biggest difference over the last time I had this discussion was, as Ray referenced, under this new act, municipalities have to opt out. You're automatically deemed to have opted in. If the municipality wants to opt out, you have to affirmatively do so. This has been something that's been on my listserv as well with the municipal attorneys throughout the state. I think the biggest concern, and it's been my biggest concern through the last couple of months, regardless of personal feelings about it, which is frankly irrelevant, just the way things are set up, the state of Michigan is woefully inadequate currently to deal with this transition. They don't have a lot of the parameters put in place, and I'm sure that it will work itself out, frankly, and they'll get things in place. But at this point, I think there's a lot of unknowns. The way the ordinance reads, it's just a very simple ordinance, just referencing, again, the establishments. And the way establishments is referenced in the in this most recent act that was passed, it's a kind of a catch-all provision when you mention establishments. It's not saying that you cannot possess it here locally, but what you're allowed to do is opt out regarding the dispensaries, the grows, the processing, and the transporters, the transporting facilities. If we remember back I think it was about a year or two ago, we talked about this with the Medical Marijuana Act and whether or not to opt in or out, and the council took no action, so we stayed out. That's what this ordinance is referencing, is the specifically opting out of those establishments, and again referencing the dispensaries, having a dispensary, having a grow, having a processing unit, and having transporters. It cannot say that you cannot have it in your possession, because that's what was passed, and will become state law here in December. One thing I think is of note that I think both as a community we should keep in mind as well, it's still under this new act that just passed, you still cannot use it in public. that's still inappropriate, illegal, and you can be fined for that. So if you're going to be smoking on the sidewalks and smoking it in public, it's still deemed to be illegal under the act as well, and you can be fined for that. But that doesn't address, this isn't what's being addressed, this is just as to those 4 referenced establishments. And as Ray said, frankly, he and I discussed this, we weren't sure what council's pleasure was. It was voted down pretty, I thought, substantially in the city of Norway, but ultimately it's council's decision on how to handle it and how to proceed, and to have input on this. So we wanted to put it in front of the council, I guess trying to anticipate what the council's thoughts were based upon the community's vote as it pertained to that act and as to those specific establishments within the city.
After the state gets a hold of what's going to be going on, which could take, I know, maybe a while, could you go back in and change the ordinance if you wanted to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know how long it's going to take for the state to be prepared for it, but I believe it was Maine passed the legalization of marijuana 2 years ago, and they just started selling now. So who knows how long it'll be before the state gets everything organized.
Well, and I
I
think
think
there's,
Colorado was also like a year and a half, 2 years after passing.
and because of the Medical Marijuana Act, the states are, at least has gotten at least a little bit of a jump start with authorizing some grows and some dispensaries. I think there was one that was licensed perhaps in Marquette. I think I saw one of the first in the UP. Houghton. So I mean, it's proceeding, but very, very slowly. And so I mean, there is something available out there for the medical marijuana patients, at least within reach. But it's something that I think that's going to take a while. I could go on for a while with some of the issues that are going to come up between the drivers, the issues with the driver's license and operating after having used. There is not a tried and true mechanism to determine whether or not you can be operating on the influence or not. It's simply if it's in your system at this point, the presence of. So there's a number of pitfalls, both for individuals that want to utilize it for medical or recreational purposes. But this is just something that we brought to council for discussion because we weren't sure where the council wished to proceed on this. And based on everything we're seeing throughout the state, it's the Michigan Municipal Association's recommendation, or at least general discussion. You can always go back and loosen things up. You can always go back and take a step back. But we wanted to get it in front of you at least for discussion and for community input, frankly, as well.
Do we want to do with this what we're going to do with the first one?
Yeah.
If we can get it in the paper in time, we'll do it the next meeting. If not, we'll do it the last meeting in December.
Yeah, we'll have, we try to have 15 days for public notice. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get that.
Yeah, we probably wouldn't have that.
No.
That's okay, so we can do it the...
Yeah, the goal was to have something in place by the end of the year.
Okay, we'll move on. Presentation, fiscal year 2017-18, City of Norway audit and management letter. Mr. Kenny?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the council for again engaging me to perform the audit of the financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2018. As I've done in the past, I prepared a series of slides which are intended to summarize the 100+ pages that are in the book and to highlight some of the items that I feel are important within there. So without further ado, we will head through the slides. The page number references you'll see matched with the page numbers actually within the bound book. So on page 5, you will find the first page actually of my audit opinion. My opinion this year is again unmodified. An unmodified opinion is the highest level of opinion that we as CPAs can render on a set of financial statements. So that's where the city has historically been and continues to be. On page 8, you will find actually a series of pages starting on page 8 that are referred to as management discussion and analysis. And that talks a little bit about the actual financial statements, and that was prepared by management. And that is under the Governmental Accounting Standards Board requirements, is required to be part of
the financial statements, and that's an analysis from management kind of what's gone on in the past year and a brief look ahead as to what's coming. Looking at the general fund, which and I've summarized page 20 here really. You can see the revenues here are about $2.7 million, consistent with where they've been in the past. The expenditures are right at $2.5 million. We did have more transfers out this year. You'll see that number is about $600,000, which is up about $300,000 from a year ago, and that is primarily attributed to the road work that was done. You did road work in conjunction with the water and the sewer projects, but you also wanted to complete roads, which made some sense. So you transferred about $300,000 from your general fund to the local street fund, which attributed to that number being larger. As a result, we actually have not a net gain, but a net loss. That line actually slopes downward as a result of that, which means that you expended more money than you took in within your general fund. Looking historically at the fund balance, which is the cumulative effect over the years, you can see that we had started out with roughly $500,000 5 years ago. Went up to 600,000, 670, got up to about $780,000 a year ago, and because of the loss this year, you'll see that we did have a drop off this year. So we are presently sitting at just over $400,000 in fund balance. As a rule of thumb, and this isn't cast in stone, and every situation's a little bit different, I like to see this would actually be a little bit higher. Not anything that you need to jump at to correct immediately. You did have kind of an anomaly with the amount of money that you spent this year with roads. But I like to see that be somewhere between 90 and 120 days of expenditures. You're at 61 days as of the end of the year. Not in any particular danger or anything. You certainly have money there so that if an emergency came up, you certainly have the funding source to take care of that. But that is something that I would like to see go back in the opposite direction starting in the next year. I mean, it depends on what you're also doing. You did have a lot of capital expenditures during this past year, and that is reflected in that number, the fund balance decreasing this year. Looking at the major street fund, you can see that this started out less than 50,000. The scale here is different, so the size of the lines changed fairly rapidly. But you can see it's been trending up kind of slowly. We were at about 125,000 last year. We were actually above $250,000, nearly 260. At the end of this year, which is a much more comfortable position. However, if you start paving roads, as you saw this year, you can consume that money in a hurry. So it's not like you're going to continue to accumulate funds in that, money into that fund. I just don't see that as being reality, but it is good to see that trend line continue upwards that we've seen over the past several years. Your non-major governmental funds, starting on the left, local streets. Again, the scale here changed a little bit. We were virtually zero, had a little fund balance, went back to virtually zero. We are at about $20,000 at the end of this year. We used the money, plus we used $300,000 of transferred in money this year within the local streets. So the fact that we have a little bit of fund balance there is good. That's not going to do much other than maybe plow a few streets for you, or maybe some very minor maintenance. But you do continue to provide those services to the residents. The DDA, you'll see, is fairly flat on top where it has been for the past several years. And that, starting over on the left, as you can see, has been hovering right around $230,000 or thereabouts, which is a real comfortable number for you. You are servicing some debt there. Those dollars continue to come in. It's been a very consistent performer, and your DDA is very active in this town, and has certainly done many good things for the residents of the city. Fire protection, you can see that we've had a slight bump at from the 2018 year. Not a large bump, certainly don't have an abundance of money in there, and there's no particular good reason to accumulate a lot of money in that fund. But we do have the fire hall debt, and we also have fire truck debt that we are paying on within that fund. The museum, again, the scale changed here, so you can see that has gone up a little bit. It has kind of leveled off over the last 3 years. Seems to be at a pretty comfortable number. That's a group that seems to really have a good feel for what they want to do and have kind of looked forward and done a good job of planning. And consequently have been able to hold their funds at a fairly steady pace, while still providing improvements to the museum itself. The debt service, you'll see there is no fund balance. That is, the money comes into the fund, the debts are paid out of the fund. So don't be alarmed by the fact that there is no fund balance there. There is not supposed to be. That's exactly the way a debt service fund is provided for. And the capital projects, you can see that it has gone up for a number of years and has gone back down. That is going to be a wildly fluctuating fund. That's true in virtually all municipalities. And the reason for that is you set money aside, you save, and then you do a project. Well, when you do, it goes up, and then it falls off in the year that you expend the dollars for the capital items that you have. And this happened to be actually the second year in a row. It didn't see a substantial fall off, but we did see some with that balance sitting at about $30,000. Communications fund, which was formerly known as TV, internet, and telephone. This is unrestricted debt position. So this is a little bit different definition than that of fund balance. What I'm looking at here is not the costs of the system. What I'm looking at is how much money do you have out there that you can use on your ongoing operations. And you can see that this number was substantially upside down 5 years ago. Saw a little bit of recovery, went flat, saw a fall off again in 17. We actually have a slightly positive number in the current year. I had discussions with management while we were here, and there's some analysis that has been done and continues to be done, excuse me, particularly in the TV arena. It seems like there's increasing market and increasing dollars to be made within the telephone and the internet side of things, not so much on the TV side of things, and that will be evaluated as you continue to head forward. You've seen a leveling off of you've seen a bleed off of customers for a number of years. That seems to have leveled over the last couple of years, or at least the pace has substantially slowed, that you saw a decrease, even with some increase in fees. So that's a good thing, and that will bode well for that fund, the stabilization of that, given the fixed nature of the costs within it. The electric fund, this continues to be your champion. You can see we were at $1.8 million, went up to $2.25 million, dropped off a little bit, and this year we're well above $2.5 million in unrestricted fund balance. That's a really solid position to be in within that fund. We all know that we continue to spend some capital dollars on the runner project and some of the other things that have gone on within the system. certainly it makes good sense to me when I look at the financial performance of that fund, that you continue to really monitor that fund closely and continue to have that there so that the dollars are available, not just for use within the electric fund itself, but also there are substantial transfers that go out to other funds within the city for their operations as well, which assists those. The water fund, again, this is unrestricted fund balance. This is reflective somewhat of the fact that you had a project ongoing, and this year you can see that project, well, it wasn't done. It was essentially done by the end of your fiscal year, and that number has turned itself around. And essentially what we've been able to do is take what were considered current items and move them into the long-term, where we're going to be repaying those as part of the debt over the next 40 years or thereabouts within that project. So that's good. I'm sure the manager will be happy when he doesn't need to file a deficit elimination plan this year as well for that. Same exact situation with your sewer utility fund. We've actually got two major projects going on there. You can see we were upside down and have been for planning reasons. And as we got into the project, we actually, particularly, we did receive a $900,000+ in grant money from the federal government during your past fiscal year. That was not completely drawn. There will actually be some additional dollars that you'll be receiving in your 18-19 fiscal year. But that has helped turn that negative net position around so that it's back on the positive side. Just looking at everything on an overall basis, the financial performance, we did see that decrease in your general fund, as I talked about, most of which is attributable to the transfers out for the roads. Major streets, we saw an increase of $137,000. So basically a break even in those non-major or other governmental funds. Communications, we did see a decrease of $65,000, and these are on an overall basis now. The electric fund, we saw an increase of $600,000 during the year. Water fund, $65,000, and the sewer fund, $932,000. Again, that's mainly attributable to the grant dollars that you received this year in association with the project. Your underfunding on your pension plan went down again. That's good. We want the underfunding to decrease. We continue to be having substantial liability there, totaling something more than $11 million. But the amount has gone down. For that, the investment rate of return, because I stood here and beat MERS up at length a couple of years ago for the second year in a row. They've had rates of return that exceeded 10%. The estimated, what they want to see as a long-term rate of return is 7 3/4. So when they earn 10%, that's really a positive, and it reflects well for the city because that's money the residents of the city don't need then to make as a contribution to the plan in order to have it fully funded. OPEB, which stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. We were required to implement GASB 75 this year. GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, said that we have this liability out there, we've had it for a number of years, and we've never recognized it on the financial statements. And the GASB came out and said, that's enough of that, we're going to put it on the financial statements. So when you look at your financials, you will see a new line item out there called OPEB, net OPEB obligation. That's what we're talking about. For the city of Norway, it's about $661,000. That's the net. So take the gross and subtract out the the total number is about just over $1 million, but we have about $400,000 in a trust fund that's designated for that operation, or for that obligation rather. So on an overall, The net increase for the year was $183,000. The net pension underfunding went down $27,000. And if we would have reported the total obligation last year, our OPEB funding actually decreased, or our OPEB obligation actually decreased $29,000. So both of those are certainly positives when you look at the overall financial viability of the city, that that the underfunding has decreased. Again this year, and I'm looking at the letters now as opposed to that are loose, that were with the books. We have no material weaknesses, we have no significant deficiencies, and we have no material noncompliances. All three of which are good. That's exactly what we're looking for. In other matters, this is a repeat comment from a year ago. Some of the utility accounts receivable accounts continue to be severely delinquent. As a result of that, we had made a change a year ago in the actual allowance, or the amount that we would anticipate we're not going to collect. We had increased that. We left that percentage the same. As this issue gets resolved, I would expect that allowance, that percentage, will probably change again, except in the other direction. Collection agencies have been tried historically. The placement of accounts on tax bill, this has not been done. That's something that has been done in other communities. It does become then a lien against the property. That doesn't mean you're going to collect them all. If there's a foreclosure on the property, some of those kinds of things, that it becomes secondary. The utilities become second as far as obligation goes for paying, but it has been at least a way to obtain some of the dollars that are unpaid. There was very little change actually last year. If you looked at this comment, you would see that number had actually increased. The amount of uncollectible had increased. It actually stayed fairly stagnant this year, but it's staying stagnant at a level that we don't want to have it at. We want to actually reduce that amount. Just going back here for 1 minute, I will tell you that on an overall basis, while this is of concern, otherwise we wouldn't be having this discussion. From an overall priority perspective, with all of the other things that you have going on, I understand that this hasn't been addressed. However, that doesn't mean that it should be ignored on a long-term basis. We've talked about staffing and whether that's what would be required to fix this issue. And we talked about that during the exit conference. I think it would certainly help, but there's obviously a trade-off between the return that you're going to get by collecting these bills as opposed to the costs that you're going to have by having additional staffing. And that, I tried to summarize as well as I could what's included, like I said, in the 100+ pages that are included in the bound book, and would be happy to try and answer any questions that the council may have of me.
Same question, Scott, for the last 9 years. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, where do you think we stand?
I would say that you've definitely improved this year. I don't remember exactly where I would have put you a year ago. I would say that you're probably between 6.5 and 7. I know a few years ago, not too many years ago, I think I was talking a sub-5 number. And the main reason for that is we now have recorded on your financial statements that OPEB liability, which is better than, frankly, what I had expected it to be. It's still a substantial number, don't get me wrong. $600,000 is a lot of money. It's better, and we have made strides within there, primarily because of performance of MERS. and the funding that the city has continued to do within the pension plan. Those are the two big liabilities. When I look at your, the amount of unrestricted net position in your electric fund, that is outstanding. The fact that you got $2.5 million there, even after you have transferred out of that fund hundreds of thousands of dollars to some of the other funds to assist with some of the operating costs in there, that certainly bodes well for the city. So it's, I think that you certainly have continued to improve, and that's where I would put it, I would say.
Maybe you can't answer this, but where do you think we would be without our power plant?
You'd be in trouble. Yeah, without your electric operation.
I just want people to realize what a gem we have down there, that's all.
I can't stress that enough. You're absolutely correct. That the fact that you do have that source of income to draw on for those things, and there are some restrictions on that. You can't just go take all of the money out of there because of the debt obligations that you have. But that is extremely important to this community.
Right, because we take out of that fund to help out the other funds when they're
Absolutely.
lagging behind.
Yep.
That's what I was gonna say, in the TV fund or the communication fund,
Yes.
did you take into account that we had a transfer out of the electrical fund to,
Did I? Yes. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that you have a positive unrestricted debt position in there this year. You did a refinancing within that fund as well, which is a real positive. We've been looking at, management and myself have talked about the cash flow on the obligation that was there, that was refinanced. And the fact that you did that is going to allow you the room within the fund, hopefully, so that you can do that. But have I accounted for that? Yes. Yeah, that's certainly taken into consideration as part of the record keeping, absolutely.
and then I imagine on the retirement too, even though we got a good payback, we're also paying more, our employees are paying more into the retirement system too.
That's correct, yeah. There have been various changes made through the negotiation process over the past, 10 years in particular, I would say, certainly more aggressively over the past, and I'm just guessing at 10 years. But I've seen certainly improvements as those, because as those dollars come from the employees, they're not coming from the citizenry for funding those obligations.
Scott, when you talked about the 3+% above, for MERS, above the, of their estimate on the return.
Yeah.
We went through, extensive conversation that we don't just automatically see 3%. There's a smoothing, they call it a smoothing activity that goes on. It goes back to the crash in '08, and they smoothed out our loss, and now they're smoothing in the return. Can you elaborate on that so we're
Sure.
just all clear that that's not just going to see,
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
3%?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, as a matter of fact. The process back in '08, as we all know, the stock market took a dumper pretty much for everybody, including the MERS plan. And we lost substantial value in the amount of assets that were in the pension plan at that point in time. In order to not have that all hit in 1 year, MERS almost immediately adopted a 10-year smoothing, so they were going to move that out over a 10-year window so that you didn't see that on a regular basis. Well, since that occurred 10 years ago, MERS has since changed its obligation to a 5-year smoothing, and actually what we're seeing now, as I stated, there is above a 10% number. Well, what they do is they take the 7.75% that they anticipate making, plus they take, and they're smoothing it out over 5 years, so they're going to take 1/5 of the excess above that, and that gets reflected into the financial statements. The rest of that actually becomes what's called deferred inflows. So we're not going to actually recognize that gain that we saw this year entirely this year. We're going to recognize 1/5 this year, 1/5 next year as we go out in time. And that becomes rolling. So we back off some of the items that we saw under the GASB 68, which is the pension footnote, obligated the disclosures. But as we head forward now, we've got almost all of those items that are for this city that are sitting out there that have not been recognized are actually positives. They're deferred inflows, which means you're going to be picking up income. Even though you've already got the money, we haven't recorded them as income yet because that's the rules that we need to follow, and that's exactly what the manager was alluding to. So the actual position within the fund itself, if we were able to record all of that, would actually be better than what's reflected in these financial statements. Hopefully that.
Well, it does. I wanted to make sure that that was explained because, as we see the returns, we don't, we're not seeing them right away. We're getting them over time.
Yep.
So, part of our frustration is that all of a sudden the legislature decides that they're going to implement standards. And then we had to go through this last year we filed for waiver, and then we have this corrective action plan, which, although we weren't successful in the waiver, I think on the corrective action plan, we're well within the parameters that they're looking for. It's just frustrating that our position is better, but yet it's not recognized when they evaluate it in Treasury. So we're graded harshly, and I guess over time that we have a reason to be graded harshly, but, we're actually coming out of it, on schedule or ahead of schedule.
Yeah, we actually did see a pickup as far as the position within the plan itself.
I mean, they want us to be out to a certain value in 20 years, and we're going to make it in 10. So, I mean, it's, we're well ahead of their schedule.
Yeah. Which kind of alludes back to your question, Lee, that, so I'm not, well, it's a large number that sits there, assuming, and I still, to this day, don't know exactly what changes were made within MERS. They didn't go from earning substantially less than 7.75% to earning a lot more. That didn't happen by accident. There were some positive changes that were made, but they're not discussing what those changes may have been, and that's okay. As long as they continue performing, we're good with that.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do with the city because that's out of our hands.
That's correct, yes, yeah. But
it does, but it does.
It does indirectly because if they don't perform there, then it falls on the citizens of the city.
Yeah.
Whereas if they perform better, which is what we've seen for the last couple of years, that would be less of an obligation on the citizens.
One other point, I know that one of the major discussion points year in and year out is road improvements. And, you show the fund balance, unrestricted fund balance in both the major and local street funds. That's something that, during budget time, we spend a lot of time talking about. With $20,000 in the local street fund, there are options for us legislatively that we can move the major fund to the local fund. But, we have to decide where, which streets we're going to be able to, or roadways we're going to be able to address. And it's another one of those long-term investment plans that we have to look at based on our current conditions. So, I mean, that's always a struggle because there's only a couple of places that we can go for funds. If it's not grant funds, and that's a challenge with the way the streets are designated.
Absolutely, and the city of Norway, like a lot of communities, certainly that I'm involved with, have had their roads refinished as a result of doing water or sewer projects or subsurface work of whatever kind there may be. generally water and sewer. So you've been fortunate in being able to keep your roads up by financing them through that project as well. And clearly, the city has done a good job of leveraging those dollars and keeping that surface infrastructure in place as well.
Any other questions? Thank you, Scott.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Scott.
you.
We'll move on to Resolution 2018-20.
I'll make a motion, we approve Resolution 2018-20, acceptance of the fiscal year 2017-18 City of Norway Audit and Management Letter.
Support.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Menegini?
Yes.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes. Sorry, I paused on that, Jeremy. I didn't know if we had to change something because I didn't mean to do that. We'll move on to Resolution 2018-21, authorization installment purchase agreement with the golf course for the pumps.
This is something that we've been talking about for the better part of, 6 months. With the golf club, they've got a major project that they have to address. The project costs $99,000, and they're not in that financial position to undertake that, and part of the reason is because the city owns the infrastructure at the golf course. All of the real assets, the clubhouse and the course itself, the permanent fixtures, which includes irrigation pumps and the sheds, those all belong to the city, owned by the city. So they have no asset to leverage to go and try and finance. And we met with them on a number of occasions. Both Candy and Lee were part of that discussion. And, we discussed with Grant and ultimately Miller Canfield that it was a proper way to deal with financing of this type of nature would be to go through this installment purchase agreement. It legally falls under Public Act 99, which is the city only has two options for funding, for financing. One is through a bond issue, straight out bond issue and sale, and the other is through what they call this installment purchase agreement, which in essence acts very similar to a bond issue. The paperwork is out before you. The First National Bank has committed to fixed rate for the course. The project cost is $99,260.52, and the contractor that was selected through their purchasing policy, through our purchasing, was Kleinman Well Drilling. So I think this is something that, as we talked about with the golf club, that they need to have these irrigation pumps operating, and they're old, they're tired, they're just not fixable anymore. And so this is something that we're extending to them. They will pay 100% of the costs for this activity, so there's no cost to the city. So it's just a matter of council approval for this installment purchase agreement. Grant, you had a chance to look over the paperwork?
I did, Ray, and as we've used in the past, Steve Manadell at Miller Canfield is kind of the statewide guy that most municipalities work with on municipal finance. As your general counsel, this isn't up in my bailiwick, and I always defer down to Mr. Mann because this is what he does and this is all he does. I think it's important to keep in mind for the city that this is our property, our pumps. We utilize the pumps as well for irrigation out at the ball fields as well, and we're working with the Oakcrest as well to address the lease terms as well, to address that they're going to be using our property, using the city's property, which is including the pumps as well.
I believe we don't use their pumps anymore, their water anymore, Mr. Carlson.
We have the option, we're going to be using our potable water. There's the option to go back and forth, but
But we haven't used their water since the end of July.
yeah, This year, we switched over, and part of that was because in last year, we had a bad problem with those pumps, and we were scrambling for irrigation on Marion Park. So we definitely had to switch over to our potable system. We have the hydrant and that line that runs right through the park. So we were able to do that. Our lease agreement now reflects that we do not use the pump water, so it's there just in case.
Okay.
We have that flexibility.
What is the cost for Miller Canfield for the work they did?
$4,500.
And that's included in this 99?
That is not. That is going to be a cost that they'll pay outside of that 99.
Oh, okay. 'cause
They did
I-
not want to include, they can't include that in the 99 as per the, through the
'cause, they-
requirements, so, but they did indicate that they're paying.
As far as I'm concerned, they have to pay for that because I cannot see giving any taxpayer money whatsoever to an entity that pays no taxes to the city of Norway or the township. Because otherwise I have no problem with the 99.
Do I have a motion on that?
I'll make the motion that resolution 2018-21 be approved.
Support.
Mr. Menegini?
Yes.
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Anyone from the audience wishing to address the council on any item can do so now. State your name and address for the record. We'll move on to council comments. Brett?
One question about Norway Township zoning. Did you plan on getting a meeting together with the township, Mr. Anderson?
I have to talk to Don, but that is the indication that we should get together with the planning commission and the two boards to discuss the moving forward and how we're going to move forward, some of the questions that they have.
Okay. Nothing further.
Lee?
Update on the hydro array. Anything new happening?
The installation is complete. They've moved the generator in less time than the worst case, so I think that was a very positive outcome. They're working on commissioning right now. They're working on, final alignments, and so I think it should be the first week of December that they're talking about.
I believe it was 37,000 on that, was that their bid to change the generator, to move it, worst case scenario?
No, it was $100,000.
100,000, so what did that come in as?
Well, I don't have the exact
You don't
figure,
have
but
the
it's.
exact, but it was definitely less.
It's definitely less.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely less.
Oh.
I'm thinking somewhere half.
Oh, great, okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing, salt. I
Yeah.
hear the price jumped up like 40% or something?
Yeah, well, actually, our budget was at $63 per ton, and it went to $74 per ton, or $75 per ton. So we're looking at probably about, what did I say, about $7,000? Yeah, so that did jump up. And there was a couple of factors that David mentioned as to why. Part of it was the strike that happened this summer, and some transportation costs.
But we got salt, because some people were saying they couldn't get salt.
Well, we haven't gotten our delivery yet, but we have salt. So we're kind of waiting to see when the delivery's gonna come. We've had nip and tuck on deliveries before, and we have a real good relationship between the county and the cities, Iron Mountain, Kingsford, where, we've shared and helped each other out. Somebody had an early delivery or, but, yeah, we're nervous, a little nervous about it.
That's all I have.
Jeremy?
I just want to remind everybody, the Santa Parade's coming up, I believe it's the 30th.
November 30th, yes.
6 PM is when the parade starts, or fireworks, then parade to follow.
Fireworks and then parade.
Then Santa will be here at City Hall.
That's correct, and typically we have it on the first Friday in December. However, because Thanksgiving was early this year, there's actually would be 2 weeks in between the parade and Thanksgiving. And in talking with the DDA and the businesses, they really want to have that kickoff, that parade as close to Thanksgiving as possible. It always works good as the next week. If you lose that extra week, it does have a negative effect on, getting people ginned up on the business side. So maybe is something we say, hey, it's the first Friday after Thanksgiving, or the week following Thanksgiving, then we don't get into this situation.
That's all I have.
I wanted to talk about when are we going to put on the agenda, whether we're going to go through the winter with the dam, or if we're going to wait for the spring, because I see that was on the memo.
Yes, I gave you the information this past week.
Do we have to vote on that, or do we?
I don't have an official calculation yet from Leaderstrove. They gave us an estimate of $100,000. I think that was something they looked at last year, so they're probably pretty close to that number. I sent out an email today. When we got the evaluation back from WPPI of where we looked at having, say, 50% of Unit 1, which is about what we're running now, through, say, till March, and then having nothing, zero, as they do the project up till June 1st, versus a winter construction where we have zero on Unit 1, we're working on that project, and then we would have the Unit 1 back by the April 1st, at 100% at the April 1st runoff. And the payback, just looking at generation lost, trade-off is net zero. So the $100,000 of construction cost is actually above on the cost side. I'd have to recommend from a return on investment side that we don't start that project until that March, because we're just not seeing from a buy-sell relationship with the units, we don't see an advantage. We're not going to gain a appreciable amount or any by having that unit available at the runoff. So it's all strictly, that construction cost. And I know that that's going to be it's more dangerous, it is expensive to run during January and February, trying to run the project. And even now, look at how cold we just got started.
A lot of it's
going to be December too.
Yeah, it's going to be depending on the weather, and then we're going to be paying guys to clean everything up down there.
So I don't know how you want to handle the decision on that. Our recommendation is not to do it, but that's, of course, council's decision if they want us to press forward.
No, I don't think we should move forward with it.
I don't either.
If the value's not there, then.
The value's not there.
Absolutely not.
So I'll let the contractor know to take the winter off, and we'll get our plans in line for starting as soon as we can when the weather breaks. I'm thinking in March, we'll be looking at taking the unit down in March.
Yeah, and we've already spent more than we thought we were gonna spend to do some of these other things. I can't see spending another, whatever, we don't have the exact amount, but say another 100,000.
And like I said, I mean, we're looking at temperatures dropping earlier this year. So we could be adding cost in December, unless we all of a sudden get a warm up, but I thought it was gonna happen during deer season, it didn't, so. Of course, I don't read the almanacs.
And I also want to thank all the people that helped on Election Day. Trish, you got a good group of people in here. They were very busy. So I want to thank all of them that came in and helped out. And thank Tricia, because that's a very busy day for her also. Grant?
Just very quickly echoing on that sentiment, sometimes you have these elections and you forget about the people that are spending hours and hours and hours beyond their normal workday executing these elections. So I know that on that election night it lasted well past 2 a.m. So also my name appeared on the ballot, and I wanted to thank the City Council and the people of the City of Norway for all their support and kind words through the whole process. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson?
Have a safe remaining hunting season and Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, travel safe.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Support?
Mr. Oja?
Yes.
Mrs. Brew?
Yes.
Mr. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Menigini?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned. On that one? Third.